Hi, uh, I'm Woo Young Chung, track producer for Track B. I'm delighted that you decide to join us for this session. Um, can we teach a computer to think ethically? That's a really fascinating question, isn't it? Today in this session, our distinguished panelists will discuss women in data ethics. So without further ado, I hand it over to you, Tasha.
Thank you so much, Wu, and that is a great question, and thank you for just having us here today. So this is the Women in Data Ethics panel discussion, and as we think about increasing investments in AI capabilities, there continuously needs to be a need to focus on developing and creating ethical and fair AI systems. And so we're just honored today to be here and be able to have some more discussions around this important topic. So I'm Tasha Austin. I'm a principal at Deloitte, and I wear a number of roles in the AI space. I lead a lot of our conversations in the AI world. I also deliver our AI capabilities and solutions to my clients in the federal government space. And then I also focus on doing a lot of the work and lead a lot of our work in Deloitte's Artificial Intelligence Institute. And so we are very fortunate today. And I want to say 3 amazing women leaders are with us, but right now, and I have 2, I think one is just running slightly behind, and I will certainly still introduce her in case she's able to join us, but very fortunate to have 3 phenomenal women join us on the panel today. They are leaders in this space. They are thinking ethical AI day in and day out. They are here to offer some perspectives on why this topic matters, and they're going to provide examples of challenges and as well as opportunities that we need to wrap our hands around when we think about ethical AI solutions. And so I'm very happy to have Joanne Stonier with us. She is the Chief Data Officer of MasterCard. We also have Kay Buttfield, who is head of AI and machine learning with the World Economic Forum. And hopefully Dr. Lethea Jackson will join us, who is the Department Chair of Technology and Security at Bowie State University, one of our historically Black colleges and universities in Bowie, Maryland. And so I'm going to give a few minutes to our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to pivot into the discussion. So Joanne, why don't we start with you?
Joanne, you're muted.
Thank you, Barry. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Tasha. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm Joanne Stonier, and I'm the Chief Data Officer at MasterCard. And I'm keenly interested in the issue of ethical and responsible and trustworthy AI. My team and I are responsible for our AI governance framework, where we try to deal with the issues of data quality, as well as ethical algorithmic processing, as well as looking at different use cases. And so we've been hot on this topic for a while, and so I'm happy to be here to discuss some of our practices, as well as some of the issues in this area. So thank you for having me.
Great. And then Kay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Certainly. So I'm Kay Buttfield. I'm head of AI and machine learning at the World Economic Forum. We actually work on governance of AI, so very much thinking about the ethical issues that arise, mainly obviously in machine learning at the moment, that governments, companies, nonprofits and professors all have to grapple with if they're going to use the technology wisely. By background, I am a barrister and judge, and I was the world's first chief AI ethics officer, so invented the title, which probably means that I have propelled a lot of people into using the word ethics, whereas many businesses might just want to think about this as problems that they are encountering when they use AI or machine learning. And so I've been with the forum for the last 4 years. We've done a lot of work in operationalizing the principles. It's no use having some principles if you don't know how to use them. So thank you, Tasha. Back to you.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, Dr. Lithia Jackson, hopefully she'll be able to join us at some point during the discussion. So we'll make sure we hear her voice as well. But I first want to start off by framing sort of the issues within AI and thinking about how we can strategically and ethically sort of focus on implementing artificial intelligence. And so, there are several real world examples of AI discrimination against people of certain ages, genders, races. And at the end of the day, when we think about data ethics and its relationship with unconscious bias, it certainly is an issue that needs to be addressed as organizations look to implement AI or to adopt AI. And so, even when I think about the work that we're doing, within the Deloitte space, we've created a trustworthy AI framework to help our clients get in front of this issue as we speak. And so, Kay, I'd like to start with you with addressing our first question. And, you held a talk previously on the evolution, the evolving world of AI ethics. And you made an interesting point about, mentioning the ethical principles of AI and the global implementation of those ethical principles. And I wonder if you might share a little bit around, why is that important? So why is it important that we implement those ethical principles? What are they? And why does success require the collaboration of government and businesses in this space?
Yes, certainly, Tasha. So I think, first of all, I would probably say, actually, we need more than governments and business. We also need the academics, and we also need civil society, because, we are at a pivotal point at the moment. I was actually privileged to talk to Joanne, I think yesterday, and she said, we are at this point where we're going slowly at the moment, but as we pick up speed, if we don't get it right now, then we are going to be sunk in the future. And I just loved that comment. So sorry for stealing it, Joanne, but it sort of makes my point about this is a pivotal point. If we as the world don't address this issue at the moment, then we can't be sure what our future looks like. And this isn't Terminator or anything like that. It's just that the systems that we're using, if they have bias and they become autonomous, then they're just going to re-bias themselves. So we have to get it right now. So you asked me about those principles. Well, there have been 190 plus sets of principles around the world. So if you look at all those principles, what we can find is that there are actually 10 principles that people around the world actually care about. And those are data privacy or privacy, safety of the AI, accountability, transparency, and fairness. Everybody wants AI to be beneficial for us. We want diversity and inclusion, which is really a lovely thing to see in these principles. We want reliability in the systems, but we also want human agency around it. And, at the forum, we talk about human-centered design. And I think that that's a really important point. We don't want the machines doing for us unless we want the machines to do that for us. So what we're seeing now is different countries doing different things. So, the most obvious one is the EU. The Europeans have just come up with putative regulation for all types of AI using a risk-based set of principles. Others would say that actually we shouldn't be using risk, we should be using human rights. So already we have a debate just about how you think about that regulation. Then in the US, I think people in government are really waking up to the fact that this is something that they need to be thinking about. And then if you just think about China, it's doing something completely different. India, we've done a lot of work with India on their national AI strategy. and how, again, you convert that national AI strategy into something that is actually operationalized, can be operationalized. South America, a lot of countries have been adopting the work that we did with the UK on procurement of artificial intelligence. And so I think we will see that roll out around the world. So in conclusion to your question, what the world does is truly important because we can't do this alone. And I'm obviously going to hand on to Joanne in a moment, maybe, but you know, those of us who work in global companies or global organizations know that it's really difficult if everybody does something different.
Well said. Yes, Joanne, please chime in. Would love to get your perspective in this space.
Sure. No, I'm enjoying all of Kay's points, and we did have an opportunity to connect. And so one of the things that I think everybody can align on, that principles are important, right? They're a great starting place for governance in this area and a great starting place for organizations of all types. And I think Kay is right that it's going to take, I think, universality of all sorts of organizations to really figure this out. And so I think the principles that Kay outlined, they align with many of our principles here at MasterCard that we use in evaluating AI and our data use. And we also are an organization that really reflects on human-centered design or individually centered design. When you start getting into how do you apply this, right? And how do you really move from kind of the theory of fairness and transparency and accountability, and how do you minimize bias? You really have to start getting into the governance framework over how do you use data, right? So data as an input into your algorithmic process. What's your use case, right? How impactful is that use of AI going to be on an individual or group of individuals, right? At MasterCard, we use AI for fraud, right? Fraud prevention, and for cybersecurity, right? And cyber defense. Well, all of those things can have very positive outcomes, but if we get it wrong, we also can have very negative outcomes. So we're very aware that our AI outcomes can be very impactful, both positive and negative. So we want to get it right, to Kay's point, that we are at this kind of first generation of AI. I think that you also then have to look at how you're crafting the algorithmic process of AI and how you're crafting that level of inquiry. And how are you really evaluating the whole process to look for bias and drift? And we'll talk more about bias in a minute, Tasha, I know we will, and what that really means. And then how are you evaluating your output? Is it valid output, or is it because something that we've taught in or inserted into the AI or machine learning process that's really kind of skewed the results, right? We call that drift. That's incorrect, right? We've taught something wrong that we know that's going to only get amplified potentially over time. Kay mentioned that we're at this generation of AI right now that can be super impactful, right? Right now, we have the chance of intervention, right? But as machines learn, they're going to learn both the purposeful things that we're teaching as well as the inadvertent things that we're teaching. And we have to pick up those inadvertent things if they're the wrong conclusions, right? Or the wrong information that the machine may inadvertently amplify as it begins to learn what we are teaching it. And so I think people get worried about AI, and I try to say to them that I think AI is not going to operate in a vacuum. I think what we're learning right now is that humans have to be very engaged in the process of development. And so if we're engaged and we're thinking responsibly about the inputs, about how we're developing it, about the impacts, I think we will get there. And of course, bias and an inclusive view, which we'll, I think, speak to in depth in a moment, right, is really, really important from all different perspectives. And as a women in data panel, I'm sure we're going to talk about that angle in a second. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. It's so important. Go ahead, Kay, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to follow on with what Joanne was saying, because, you know, a lot of people say, well, where do we start on this journey? And obviously Deloitte has tools, but we too at the forum, we've been working for the last 4 years to produce that governance layer tools. So, if you are thinking, oh gosh, I'm learning all this and what do I do with it? There are tools available to help you.
Yeah, thank you, Kay, for sharing that. I'm glad you mentioned governance because I was going to amplify it and cheer Joanne, for actually mentioning governance matters, and love the use cases around cyber and fraud, and love the responsible thinking that matters when we're developing AI solutions. And so what a nice pivot into the conversation around the role of gender diversity and just diversity in general with respect to AI. And so, Joanne, why don't we start with you? You've already outlined some of the challenges in this area when we're thinking about AI development, but it would be great if you could talk a little bit more about it from what you're seeing in the financial services sector. And I want you to think about how might, increasing diversity within tech roles and actually even beyond tech roles, this is diversity in general, how does that help create more ethical AI?
Okay, so we started kind of talking about AI at a very high level, but when you begin to think about how AI works, right? In the first generation of data analytics, we would form an inquiry that said, if we find this condition in a data set, then do something, right? But we were defining the condition in the data set. Now we are looking for conditions in a data set that we have not really examined. And unless we're careful, right, the AI will tell us those conditions. And as a society, a lot of data sets have been assembled without what I will say a lot of care. Not because we've done it purposefully, but just because society has certain what I call flat sides, right? Or other people will call inequities. And as women, we know, and there's been a great book written about this, right? I think I'm trying to remember the name of it. I will get it in a minute. I think it's called Invisible Women. And it talks about how the world is generally designed for men, right? Not for women. And all of us who, I know it's been a while since many of us have been on a plane, but all of us ladies who've had to climb on an airline seat to get at our luggage, right? Know that average height doesn't always work for all of us, right? And so the law of averages is usually based upon male height. And so when you begin to think about that, and you think about the law of averages not working for the population that you're designing for, you have to begin to look deeper at the data. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about bias in AI and bias in data. And that's when an inclusive workforce of all types brings their experience to solving a data problem. And I'm really passionate about this because I do think that this really makes a difference in the group of people that are coming together to solve a problem and to develop a solution, right? Because you can have all sorts of inadvertent flat sides first in your data set, right? So I talked about, how do you define your problem? You may even define your problem in a way that's exclusionary without even thinking about it. It may exclude certain populations, right? So you think about that, you're going to use crime statistics, right? But if the crime statistics, right, are meant to then exclude populations, or the data's been collected incorrectly, right? And it's just because of a neighborhood being adjacent to a freeway, right? You may not recognize why that information or how that information has been collected and what it might mean to a group of individuals or the people who live in that area, right? So if they get excluded from a service, that could be very bad, right? If you have people who are defining the problem and then looking at the data and looking for things like coverage bias, when the data doesn't represent all of the population, or sample bias, right? The data collection process wasn't randomized, right? I use the example all the time. If you're using a voter registration database from early 1910, please recognize what that is. It's not going to include women in the United States, right? It's not going to include people of color. That's fine if that's what you want to use, but recognize the flat sides, right? And so if you have an inclusive workforce, they will start bringing these issues up in the data set design, in the algorithmic design, right? It will be a better product, and we will have better and better data sets as we try to collect them in a more inclusive manner. So that's just kind of a taste. And then there are a million of examples where the data itself, and the one I always use is Spanish to English translation, right? We have feminine and masculine pronouns in Spanish. And immediately the machine is going to start translating that certain professions are masculine, or feminine just by that pronoun. And if your team isn't paying attention, doctors will always be masculine and never feminine. So I'll stop there.
You know, well, I'm a little speechless, Joanne, because that wasn't a taste. That was like a lesson. I took plenty of notes in like in the 5 minutes of what you just sort of laid out very well.
More, right? But this is the fun of designing in a team that teaches you, right? So we have a great team at MasterCard.
Exactly. And now I'm gonna think about the airplane example that you gave every time I get on the airplane.
Keep hoping that we're going to get different designs, you know, but we'll see. We'll see into the future.
All right, and I know Dr. Jackson has joined us. Before I get to you, Dr. Jackson, Kay, why don't you, any other perspectives you want to offer there from to follow up on some of what Joanne shared with us? Anything else you have?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, you know, I support obviously everything Joanne said, but just going back to those resources that we have developed, we've been doing a lot of work with organizations that are already a fair way down the route to using artificial intelligence fairly or ethically. And one of the things that has there are 3 things that have come out of that. One is, if you're going to use AI wisely, you need to be educating and training your staff. The next is you need to be thinking about that product design from the very beginning. And the part of that is exactly what Joanne said, having a good team, having a diverse team. So don't just leave it to the data scientists, bring in that diversity from humanities and also diverse population so that you're much more reflective of the population when you're actually setting out to design those algorithms. And thirdly, it's about organizational change. You know, AI, using AI throughout your organization is going to take a change in the way that your organization thinks and is going to take that training. So just take, for example, your human resources department wants to use AI. Do they actually have the training to think about what that is going to mean to your organization and the biases that could come from that, and to look for the right suppliers of those programs?
Very well said, and I took notes, and I will go back and amplify what you said about, you know, organizational change. This is certainly a cultural shift, and we're going to have to be ready for it, because there's a lot of change management that's going to come with, figuring out how to make sure we take everyone on a journey and help them understand sort of the do's and don'ts as they look to implement AI in their respective organizations. Dr. Jackson, it is great to see you. We're happy to have you here with us. I tried to do my best to do a great introduction for you and serve you well in that space to catch you up on the conversation. I think it would be very beneficial for our audience to understand some of the key issues that you're seeing in academia with respect to AI development. And if you can tie that to the diversity conversation that we just had, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about the fact that Kay and Joanne and I are all on the same page, which is a very big start, because we know computer scientists and data scientists cannot be the only ones developing the artificial intelligence. And from an academic standpoint, AI really focuses on the basic level of learning, such as memorization, frequently asked questions, intelligent tutoring systems, and things like chatbots. It does not assist with comprehension, higher order thinking skills, such as critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and knowledge management, which is why some educators are slow to adopt AI at this point. And when you look at the data, which is what Joanne really focused on, the whole idea about the data, AI is really formed based on the data. And it involves issues such as informed consent, whether the students have consented to it, privacy, and biased data sets. And then we look at how this data is analyzed, which does involve issues of implicit bias and assumptions. So AI really does need to do ethical things and do things ethically so that everybody is learning and reduces the possibility of unintended consequences. So I say, if we're going to use AI in education, we have to go beyond human implicit bias, which the data that is gathered does not. so that students can achieve these learning outcomes in their lifelong learning opportunities. So you have to realize that if AI is to augment a teacher, it's got to go beyond what a teacher would do. So AI can't see the student, can't hear the dialect, it cannot read the name, it is just supposed to teach. But right now you're dealing with humans who are programming this. And so all that plays into a factor. I know at Bowie, we do use chatbot and frequently answered questions, which is about as far as it can go right now in that learning space.
All right, thank you for that. So I'd like to pivot a little bit to sort of shaping the path forward for AI. And, we talked about the bias in AI and the issues of this. We talked about, increasing the workforce and thinking about diversity when we do this as an opportunity to reduce some of this bias. And so when we think about shifting to the future and understanding what opportunities exist in your respective industries and your areas of focus, each of you, if you all could offer some perspective here, how are you in your respective roles influencing the future of AI and working to reduce unconscious bias, thus, ensuring ethical AI in your respective spaces? So, Joanne, why don't we start with you?
So you can tell by my remarks and this discussion that we are keen to really include all of our processes really are focused on reduction of bias, understanding of bias, and then getting to really the individually centered outcomes that are really desirable. And so our governance process really does start with what's the right use case for AI, right? So where are we deploying it in the right way? Are we training all of our employees that are involved in the AI development process in really thinking through these issues, right? So our data designers who really understand the data, our data quality experts, right, who understand the data sources, who understand what the data sets are composed of and can do that evaluation, along with our data scientists who, I think Dr. Jackson's right, you can have that implicit bias in how the questions are worded, how the algorithms are created. We didn't talk about that, but that is another issue that you have to be really careful of. So what we've done is we've created a methodology that we use to actually evaluate each one of our AI applications within the context from which it's being used. And depending upon its individual impactfulness and on a group of individuals as well, we actually rate the impactfulness of any of our products or solutions on a scale. It's a color-coded scale at the moment of green, yellow, orange, red, and purple, right? So that we can have the team appreciate that what they're designing, if it's in that purple red zone, may be highly impactful and therefore must be handled with care. And MasterCard is really a B2B company with a B2C brand. And so a lot of our products and solutions then are handed off to one of our banks, our merchants, or government partners, where they're going to use one of our products or solutions on a data set that I do not have access to or my team doesn't. And so we must also then be very careful in explaining how our AI has been developed and what inherent conditions in another data set need to be understood before a product or solution is applied. Because I can't tell if a flat side in a data set it's going to be applied to, right, needs to be understood in that application process. And so we're getting better and better. I was saying to Kay just the other day that this is a very detailed process right now. And so it's taking us a lot of time to get it right, but we believe it's very valuable and our teams are learning. Again, it's early days. We think the time and the investment is right. We want to be a responsible data company. We want to design with individuals at the center of our data design, but it is time consuming. But we think over time, we're getting better and better at it.
Great, thank you for that. Kay, anything to add here?
Yeah, I guess so. You asked, how we're moving the needle. And I always say, well, let's look at our projects and is it going to move the needle globally, or is it going to move the needle where it really needs to be moved? So, we have now 15 different offices around the world, all working on these issues of AI and ethics or fairness. And so they're working on things like with their governments, things like how do you wisely procure artificial intelligence? And we've been working with our company partners on some of the things I've told you about before, but we're just now beginning to think about ESG. So our investors have been coming to us and saying, should AI ethics be included in ESG? And I say, yes, I think it should. So we'll start working on that. But on the other end, fortunately, VCs have now started coming to us as well and saying, you know, should we be investing in startups that haven't been thinking about ethics? And I'm busy saying, no, you shouldn't. So that's a great, that seems to me another place where we can actually move the conversation really effectively from sort of pincer movement. And, you know, then there's the work that we've been doing with UNICEF and will.i.am around smart toys. And how do you think about the education of our children with AI when we don't know what they're being taught and we don't know how their creative play is affected by being taught by AI. And then the one that I worry about a bit because I'm old, you know, when I'm looked after by AI, I want there to be ethical AI.
So, I'm a bit speechless again here. I will say though, I love the emphasis on the education of our youth in this space. That's very, very important. So thank you for highlighting that. Dr. Jackson, any perspectives here?
Yeah, I want to say that I'm a member of the American Association of American Colleges and Universities, and we go around with TIDES, which is Teaching and Increasing Diversity, since 2014 to all the universities in the United States, in which we actually spend time with computer scientists or STEM teachers to help them understand what is bias, what is implicit bias. And I think it's got to start with the human element first. So if we can get, and that's where the men come in, the men do come to these training sessions. It is really, I guess the word is lifting, it's evaluating, and it is bringing an equivalence to what learning should be about. And when we start talking about AI, and I realize the power that the university professor has, you can have 600 students come into a major and only 100 come out. I mean, you've got to figure out how you're going to get all 600 to come out. And when we start growing that from what I consider to be the top down, the professor to the student, to the high school level, then I think that the data that we will see, people will start to say, well, this is not included in the data, or how can we bring more of this to the data? Something came to my attention in another meeting was that during this whole COVID thing and everybody had to go online. This is very basic. Everybody had to go online. And the reports came back that the underrepresented groups did not do as well online. And I said, we're at exposure. When you talk about diversity and inclusion, you have got to include exposure and empathy as well. So if the students have not been exposed to it, how are they supposed to perform at a level of the expectation of the students who have been exposed to it? So when you start talking about AI, which seems to be, it's not a new concept, but it's new to the HBCUs, we in our program have started more research of understanding how the AI works in our own backyard. And I think that's important too. So the funding has got to come to the HBCUs for that to actually make it more of an equitable, which is what we're talking about, and an empathetic and a diverse and a fair and an equivalent type of process. So I think it starts there, and that's where the work has been for us in this group.
And that is so important, because how can we achieve aspirational goals around building, you know, a diverse workforce if some of our largest sort of diverse communities, like the historically Black colleges and universities, still have to focus on even getting sort of the game straight in that space, right? So thank you for highlighting that. I think some of the questions that we have coming in actually tie to some of what you were getting at, Dr. Jackson, as well as you, Kate and Joanne. And so any one of you can take this question, but there are two questions here. One was, how can women be prepared to play in this field? And the other one was, is it really about teaching computers to think ethically, or does it start with getting people to think ethically? Like, you know, can we offer some perspective around either one of those questions?
Obviously, it starts with getting people to think ethically, because the machines can't do anything by themselves at the moment. Although, as Joanne says, they can ingest things that lead them to the wrong conclusions as well. So I'll defer now to Joanne and Lethea.
Yeah, I think I agree that the machines, so people have to be aware. I think that, you know, we talk about ethics, and I worry about that because as Kay started her comments, globally ethics are different in different cultures, right? But if we're responsible and we begin to understand, right, that data has flat sides, and I think we're all talking about the same thing, that we need individuals to be trained and aware that data may not contain the information we need, or it may have misinformation that the machine will amplify. So we need to, as humans, teach the machine the right things. Now, as far as women getting involved, I think that this is an issue that I think every female executive is looking at, right? Every mother, I think every aunt, is looking at, you know, why do girls drop out of math? Why are they keen on math till they're 13? Why do they play video games till they're 13? What is in our society that, you know, and I'm going to turn to Dr. Jackson as the educator, but what happens, what have we done to our children so that girl children, female children seem to get turned off in this space, and we need to turn them back on, because there are so many different careers, right? I'm trained as a lawyer, I'm trained as a computer scientist, I'm also trained as a financial person, but there's also many careers that are in data that women can contribute to. So that's number one. I think we have to explain now that we also are living in a data-driven society, a digital society, that data is going to be a native skill that girls and boys are going to need to speak and understand, whether they go into being in entertainment, because entertainment will be digitally driven. Sports will be digitally driven, and how statistically sports teams analyze other teams and create their strategies. That business, finance, law, health and medicine, right, and care into the future, the manufacture of toys and other things, everything is going to be data and digitally driven. And so if we understand that and we demystify data, I do think women will be more drawn into this profession. At MasterCard, we are creating different courses and different pathways to try to create a more inclusive workforce for women, but we have a program specifically for girls for tech that we try to increase girls and their participation and interest in this area. And we are increasingly broadening that to all sorts of inclusive populations, because we recognize we want all sorts of individuals to be part of our workforce and be part of our conversation, because it's going to be so critical to design for the next generation of products and solutions in our space and in others.
And Tasha, just adding to that, I do think at the moment, whilst we don't have our girls trained, and perhaps we don't have as many people of color in this space, that doesn't mean to say that they can't be contributing to the development of these algorithms. That's what I was saying about diverse teams. Humanities actually matters in this in this world as well.
Well, yeah, and go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
Yeah, I would like to add to this and say, because Joan, you brought up a good point. At 13, why do the girls stop? And I want you to look at their role models from middle school to high school. The predominant gender that is teaching STEM are men. So it's like the chicken and the egg story, which one came first? So the whole idea is to get more women in the space, to get more women in, and we have to include everybody, including the men. And what I've realized is, because I did an experiment for about 5 years where I actually went into a school to teach, and we started with maybe 3 girls. But when I started acting like a girl and talking to the boys like we were girls and we belong, we went from 3 out of 30 to 15 out of 30 taking the class. When I humanized computer science, it was not hard, it was not earth-shattering. You can wear makeup, you can look pretty, you can say stupid things and still be involved in it. And several of the girls who have graduated from high school said that that was influential. So I just think that we have to not point fingers, but we have to embrace the whole concept. And I think that the men that are teaching it need some guidance as well. It's now we're in a learner's environment all over the place because of the new COVID. And so I just think I don't want to alienate anybody in order for somebody else to grow, but I do have to realize what I have to do to promote everybody so that we all grow.
And I think it's possible, you know, I mean, we talk about the problems, but, you know, let's just at least be a little bit optimistic. Joanne and I are both lawyers by background. Certainly when I started, we were massively underrepresented compared with our male colleagues. You know, as a barrister in England, there were just a few of us. And now there are more women in law than there are men. And so I think, you know, there's cause for some optimism here.
Yeah, totally agree. You know, just expanding on that a little bit, one of the questions that's coming in is, you know, how does the message get to the right people though? Like, you know, we think most women recognize that this is an issue, like we're talking about it, but the people in charge of leading AI initiatives and developing are often male. And so they may not recognize, you know, the issue. And so how do we get this tone all the way to the top so that, you know, we can focus on being more inclusive? You know, where does that messaging start? How do we work through that?
Yeah, I think that's an easy one. I think most men are advocates. They have wives, they have daughters, and they want a world for their families. So we start there. We start close to the heart. But they're also business people, and they have customers that are women. And so they want to design for their customers. They want to design for the constituencies, right? And so once they understand the relationship, and they want a diverse workforce usually, they understand that the studies have proven over and over again, right? The more inclusive your design is, the better the product at the output, right? And AI is no different, and technology is no different. We're just using different tools now, and we need to make sure that we are training. And I think that both Kay and Dr. Jackson are saying, and I'm saying the same thing. I think I'm hopeful, right? I think we can get there. I just think that, you know, for some reason, we have not really been paying attention because we've come to this point, if you really think about it, very, very quickly, right? COVID has made a dramatic leap forward in all of the data sciences and all of data uses and all of digital. Look how this conference is being put together, right? All of this is a new world order that we have to now speed up the training and the engagement of women and men in this area. But I don't think it's an issue that men reject. I think actually men, in my experience, usually embrace and say, absolutely, I want more women on my team. I want a more inclusive team because I know I'm going to get a better result.
Yeah, I agree with Joanne on that. Once you look at the heart, I think that's what's going to move things forward quicker.
I think the other thing is also creating a work environment that women want to work in. You know, because on the other side of the coin, from my experience, my daughter's a pilot in the US Air Force, and there are very few women pilots in the US Air Force. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Well, you know, perhaps that's because of the scandals that we've seen around women in the military. And so we just need to make sure that we are welcoming women into our organizations as well.
I think that's a very key point, making sure that there's space and the culture is there where we want to come in. And shout out, because I think there are many male advocates that would love to see more women as leaders in this space. And I have many of them at Deloitte, and I'm very, you know, fortunate to have that. And I also think that, you know, it's continuously an opportunity to improve. And so that's why I love the emphasis on we're all hopeful. We're all hopeful. That's why this conversation matters. People hear it. Some of our influencers are in the audience. They can make decisions even from some of the tips and knowledge that we've given to them as well. And so thank you for the conversation. Another question that came up was around fairness in the data. And can we address fairness in the data before AI is applied? So someone asked that question. Any perspectives there from any of you?
I think absolutely. You can evaluate data sets if you understand how you're going to use them. So I think that, you know, understanding data quality, it doesn't mean you need to manipulate your data set, but it does mean that as part of your data quality process, if you're using AI and any analytic process, you should understand what is this data going to be used for? It's the analysis, really what we call fit for purpose. What is this fit for purpose for? We also do a fair amount of work for social impact, and we get queries about MasterCard data from all sorts of organizations, academic and nonprofit, and they ask for MasterCard data, but they don't understand it. And we know what it's really best for, right? And so different data sets, you need to have someone in your organization who has done that examination and understands what the data is fit for use.
There's another question. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
Yeah, I love the different data sets, and I love the perspective from more than just one person. So the humanities piece too, I think would help to drive a stronger, equitable look at the data.
Yes, certainly matters here. And there's another question, and we probably talked a little bit on sort of the human resource aspect of this and what we need to consider when we're applying AI to HR processes. But a question came in around bias in AI filtering. So do we think there's bias in AI filtering out people based on diversity during the hiring process? Any thoughts there?
So yes, and yes, we need to do something about it. And fortunately, I have had a team led by Professor Hollister out of McGill Business School, working on this for the last 2 years. So watch this space, because in the next couple of months, we will be providing guidelines, which we hope that companies will be able to use, and governments, etc., to really think through those hiring decisions that they make and how they purchase the right tools in order to make those decisions.
Yeah, well, thank you for working on that, because I do think that's a real issue. So I'm glad we were sort of honest about this being and acknowledging that it's an issue. Any other thoughts, Joanne or Dr. Jackson? We had one or two more questions I wanted to get to, but any thoughts there?
No, I mean, I agree with Kay. I think that I was actually, when Kay and I connected, we spoke about that topic, and that one of the things that I think many organizations purchase AI in that area. And one of the challenges when you are purchasing AI is that many AI vendors do not want to be forthcoming in how their AI was developed, because they want to claim that it is, intellectual property. So therefore, I don't want to disclose too much. But I think that we have to get better as consumers of AI, right? Organizations that consume the AI that somebody else has developed, but you have to be able to ask the questions around what were the data quality, was that data collected? What was the humanitarian view of the data, right? What was your process for eliminating bias or the flat sides of either the algorithmic process, the output, and how is it applied? So we actually are engaged with a roundtable of other companies, the Data and Trust Alliance, on this topic as well. And so Kay and I are actually going to try to link up these two initiatives to see if the framework that the World Economic Forum has sponsored actually works for us, and see if we can inject even more energy into this area, because we know it's a concern.
And I should also just mention that Commissioner Sonderling of the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission is making this his priority. So that's good. There's movement in this space.
Yeah, and I love the collaboration. So I'm glad that we've actually came together in this session and somehow figured out how to continue to collaborate even beyond this discussion. One of the questions that's top of mind as well is sort of what's hard about your role in this space? Is it taking the organization on this journey? What do you think is some of the more difficult things about what you're trying to do and influence in the AI development space? Any thoughts there?
I think in the academic world, it seems hard. I think when we look at it academically, it just seems hard. It's bigger than just programming. It's bigger than the data sets. It's bigger than the machine learning that comes with it. It's so much bigger. You got to put it together. It's just not just like corn, it's just like eating cereal, you need milk. So it's just like putting all these things together to make a complete package seems hard and difficult, or it is made to seem hard and difficult. And it's just like when we enter in these competitions with the larger majority schools, we place third place. But what it is the schools have the resources and the things to make it look easy. And so from my perspective, we have to figure out how we're going to make it look easy for all the students to actually participate. And so trying to put minds together to make one picture is that's that whole collaborative, which I'm glad Kay and Joanne are trying to come together to make a big difference, because that's going to make a big difference for everybody. It's just that whole collaborative piece, because you have your island of people who are doing this, your island of people who are doing that, and then trying to put it all together. And I think it just seems hard. I think that's the biggest difficulty in the academic space.
Yeah, hard and complicated. I've heard noise in some instances where just the understanding of AI, the concept of AI seems complicated in itself to many. And so how do we explain it in a way that's easily digestible, I think is top of mind for many folks as well. Joanne, Kay, anything you want to add here about what makes your role hard in this space? Anything there to share?
I think
Go ahead,
go
Kay.
on, Joanne.
No, go ahead, Kay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think from my perspective, it's actually getting a bit easier. When I was one of the few people talking about AI and ethics, it was really hard. But what's still hard is really getting business, other than enlightened folk like Joanne, to really sort of understand that this is something that their customers care about. This is something they need to care about. It's something that their employees need to care about. And it's easier, perhaps for the very early developers of AI, but for all the companies that have got to become AI companies, it's so much harder for them to get their thinking around the fact that responsible AI matters. And it's not just, how can I apply AI as fast as possible to make as much more money as possible?
Okay, so I guess for me, the hard part has not been the adoption of ethical AI. I think because we chose back in 2019 to be a responsible data company, this aligns with our mandate and with our point of view. I think it's more that the volume and the pace of what we're trying to navigate is challenging because there's still too much unknown, right? And so we're still at this point in time where we're doing a very detailed examination of our use cases. And while we're learning and we're able to develop the frameworks that I spoke about earlier, it is a bit of a labor-intense activity. And so I find that my team and the rest of the AI teams, right, and individuals, there can be a bit of a crunch, right, depending upon the pace of what we're trying to develop. And so trying to recruit talent in this area is challenging. Trying to explain the level of scrutiny that we're going through and why it's important now, and trying not to delay speed to market too much while we are trying to be ethical and responsible. There's a little bit of that kind of tension always, but by and large, the company is very supportive of the process, but it is this moment in time right now where we have so much going on that is one of the challenges that we have, I think. And it's back to finding the right people and talent that we talked about.
Great, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for us to understand day in and day out that this is not easy, and there are going to be challenges along the way. And so thank you for highlighting some of those examples. Final question is, as you think about the one thing you want to leave with the audience in the topics of AI ethics, what would that be? And it would be great if each of you could just offer, that one thing you want to leave the audience with. We can start with you, Joanne.
I wanted to hear what Kay had to say. I think for me that I do think that inclusive design and inclusive thinking is really, really important in this space. And if I think for a long time we focused on the data science. I think that in my experience, and I had the good fortune of having Andrew Ng here at MasterCard to interview him, and he's now talking about data as the food for AI. So if I had one thought that I could leave all the chief data officers in the audience thinking about, is that data is the food for AI. And so the better and better we can understand the food and the AI process, the better and more responsible and ethical the AI is going to be. And the more inclusive your team can be, the more diverse perspectives you bring to the process, I think also the better and better results you're going to get. So I think I will leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that I would have to say, once you realize what the question is that you're trying to solve, what is the question you're trying to solve? I think the team should ask themselves 3 questions. Is it fair? Is it true? And is it necessary? The additional piece I will ask is, do you have all the pieces? So that's where the humanities piece comes in.
Great. Kay, any thoughts here?
Yes, so I actually want you to think of yourself as members of the public, because when you're not in the office, that's what you are. You're members of the public, and you will be buying AI for yourself, or AI-enabled things for yourself, for your kids, for your parents. And what ethical standards do you want to see in those? Once you've worked out what ethical standards you want for yourself and your things that you buy for yourself, then you can see yourself as a customer, and you can begin to work on how you want to deliver ethical AI to your customers.
That was well said. And I'm taking notes if you all see me looking down, because I'm like, this is some really good perspectives around, how we should be thinking about AI going forward. And so, Joanne, I'm just trying to make sure I got my notes right. You said data is the food for AI. So I certainly caught that. And Dr. Jackson, you said, the questions we need to be thinking about is, is it fair? Is it true? Is it necessary? Do we have all the pieces? And then Kay, love the conversation around, the ethical standards I want for myself. And then how that translates into sort of my appetite for, focusing on ethical AI and the development of AI in general. And so love sort of the focus on, sort of our end rather. And just love the feedback that you all have been giving us. I've certainly taken a full page of notes. I certainly appreciate all of the passion that you all have brought into this conversation. I love the collaboration. I love the examples. And, there's some examples that now when I see a palette, I get on an airplane, like there are things that, will resonate with me very well from what you all have shared here. And Dr. Jackson, as an alumni of our historically Black colleges and universities, I certainly hear you. I'm certainly a STEM background out of the HBCU population. I hear you on some of the calls for action, even in that space, and why that matters. And so to wrap this up, what I got is responsible AI matters. I've gotten that diversity and inclusiveness in AI matters. Ethical AI matters, which was the basis of this conversation. And how amazing was it to have 3 phenomenal women leaders just touch on this discussion in this space. And my hope is that you all will continue to influence in your respective markets and really drive a lot of these messages home. And so with that, I will wrap up the discussion, and thank you again to all of our panelists. Wu, back over to you if there's anything you need to say to close us out.
Oh, yes, I would like to, as a representative of this symposium, I would like to express our deepest appreciation and gratitude for all panelists for bringing this conversation of this very critically important topic to our symposium. And also, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who attended this symposium. I do personally believe that this is a really important topic that we should be thinking about as we accelerate the development of AI and other it's the AI and machine learning and so on. I just want to let you know about the program note. Next session in this track will begin at 11:30. So please stay tuned. And this will conclude our session, this session.